I am going to give you a little bit different perspective as an OB-GYN, because OB-GYNs who have had the courage to practice according to the Hippocratic Oath have been in this battle for 50 years. And we have learned some very important things in the battle. And part of what I wanted to do was just to kind of step back a minute and take a little bit of a more philosophical approach, because what we're fighting is bigger than just the pandemic. I have no financial disclosures. No one's paying me for this. I want to articulate the basic tenets of the two philosophical views regarding the ethical foundation of physician action. I want to identify areas of agreement and disagreement between these worldviews, and to recognize the key words and ideas around which the crux of the discussion revolves, and the implications for your current and future medical practice. So I'm going to quote from Margaret Mead, who is no conservative. She said, "With the Greeks, the distinction was made clear. One profession was to be dedicated completely to life under all circumstances, regardless of rank, age, or intellect. The life of a slave, the life of the emperor, the life of a foreign man, the life of a defective child. This is a priceless possession which we cannot afford to tarnish. For the first time in our tradition, there was a complete separation between killing and curing. Throughout the primitive world, the doctor and the sorcerer tended to be the same person. He with the power to kill had the power to cure. But society is always attempting to make the physician into a killer, to kill the defective child at birth, to leave the sleeping pills beside the bed of the cancer patient. It is the duty of society to protect the physician from such requests." This is 1972. It's a very interesting article I came across in the British Medical Journal from 2002. What is a good doctor and how do you make one? So this question, they solicited a bunch of letters from their readership about what a good doctor was. I bring this up because the picture is so telling. You've got a woman in bed rubbing a lamp to get her genie doctor out. Well, what we're in right now is a 2,500-year-old philosophical argument. It's a philosophical argument about how a physician should act and what physician actions are right or wrong. Science can only answer the question, what is? Science cannot answer the question, what should be? That's a question for normative ethics. So we're going to turn to some dead Greeks and to see if we can find the answer. There's a really good article by authors Ryan and Deasy from 2001 on happiness and human potentials. And for simplistic physicians like myself, they boiled down normative ethics into a dichotomy, which as an OB-GYN, I love dichotomies. I like surgery, two parts, good and bad. And this is called On Happiness and Human Potentials. And they contrast the two worldviews that we're dealing with right now. One worldview comes from Aristotle and Plato, which says that happiness is a byproduct of right action for right reasons. So doing the right thing according to virtue and reason is the substance of well-being or health. Let me say that again. Doing the right thing according to virtue and reason is the substance of well-being and health. This is called a virtue ethic view. In contrast, a contemporary philosopher, Aristippus, said, "No, the goal of life is to experience the maximum amount of pleasure, and happiness is the totality of one's hedonic moments." So happiness or pleasure is the substance of well-being or health. And this is called utilitarian hedonism. So what do we hear right now? I mean, I want you to think about these two worldviews and where American medicine is at this point. The Hippocratic Oath is a virtue ethic document. It assumes that certain actions are good and certain actions are not. It assumes that physicians have a duty to act rightly toward the patient. And it assumes that acting rightly toward a patient results in health for both the physician and the patient. So I know you know the Hippocratic Oath, but it was always interesting to me to go through it and read it one more time. The first tenet is to teach medicine only to those who are bound by this oath. Why did Hippocrates do that? Medicine is powerful. It's not for everyone, and he wanted to make sure that the person that he entrusted the power of his knowledge to had the same viewpoint of putting the patient first that he had. I will impart knowledge of the art to students bound by this contract and having sworn this oath to the law of medicine, but to no others. To act only for the benefit of the patient. I will use those regimens which will benefit my patients, according to my greatest ability and judgment, and I will do no harm or injustice to them. Into whatever homes I go, I will enter them for the benefit of the sick. To never assist in suicide or practice euthanasia nor suggest it. I will not give a lethal drug to anyone if I am asked, nor will I advise such a plan. To never perform an abortion. And similarly, I will not give a woman a pessary to cause an abortion. To have the humility to refer to physicians of sufficient expertise. I will not use the knife even upon those suffering from stones, but I will leave this to those who are trained in this craft. 6, to never have sex with patients, avoiding any voluntary act of impropriety or corruption, including the seduction of men or women or men, whether they are free men or slaves. And 7, finally, to maintain patient confidentiality. Whatever I see or hear in the lives of my patients, whether in connection with my professional practice or not, which ought not be spoken of outside, I will keep secret, as considering all such things to be private. From the minority opinion in physician care in 400 BC to the worldwide foundation of medical ethics for the past 2,000 years in Christian, Jewish, and Islamic medicine, the oath is what defines the doctor-patient relationship and makes it different from a contract with a used car dealer. It is characterized by the physician's sacred vow to protect their patients, not to do them harm. It is the Hippocratic Oath which forms the basis of a physician's conscience. So let's look at this. This 2,500-year-old argument is actually really important. It's actually fundamental to understand the raging discussion that's going on right now. Virtue ethic as a philosophy assumes that there is an ideal, that there is an objective standard of truth and goodness to which all human beings are accountable. Utilitarian hedonism assumes by definition that there is no ideal and no objective standard of truth and goodness to which all human beings are accountable. Logically, it's only one or the other. There either is or isn't. Historically, in Western civilization, a good man was one who fulfilled his duties to his family and church and society as an obligation to God or the gods. Utilitarian hedonism says, since there is no objective ideal to be accountable to, a good man is one who is free from all social constraints, one who has no relational obligations to family, church, or society, accountable only to self. This was articulated by Jean-Jacques Rousseau in the 1700s. This is an old idea competing with virtue ethics. And the only obligation for a good man is to the state, and the ultimate good is maximizing net happiness or pleasure. So let's turn to us. What's a good physician? As British Medical Journal asks, what is a good physician? The duty of a good physician in a virtue ethic philosophy is to protect and save the life and functioning of his or her patient and to relieve pain. But in a patient-controlled healthcare system that is functioning under utilitarian hedonist philosophy, the duty of a good physician is to do whatever the patient asks in order to maximize patient-defined goals. In a state-controlled healthcare system, the duty of a good physician is to act as an agent of the state to implement state-defined health goals. Where do they agree? They both agree. Physicians have a conscientious duty to work to save the life and improve the health of sick patients. Where do they disagree? The definition of conscience, duty, and health. So before we move any further, I have to do a little bit of clarifying of terminology, because after the Dobbs decision, when my organization, the American Association of Pro-Life OB-GYNs, was expecting a rational debate and finally to get to talk about the effects of abortion on women as well as on the human being in their womb, what we got was mass insanity, mass medical insanity. People were saying, oh, women can't get miscarriage care. What? Pro-life OB-GYNs have been giving excellent miscarriage care for 50 years. Women can't get treatment for ectopic pregnancy. What? Pro-life OB-GYNs have been treating ectopic pregnancies forever. Well, women will die because they will have life-threatening conditions. What? Every pro-life OB-GYN separates a mom and a baby, even if the baby can't survive, to save the mom's life. So let's talk about some clear definitions of these terms. We'll start with abortion. The historical roots of the term abortion, pre-1970s, the definition was the loss of any pregnancy for any reason prior to 20 weeks, in contrast with a birth, which was a parturition after 20 weeks. It was a gestational age-defined definition of the separation that happens between the mom and the fetus. This definition included miscarriages, which were termed spontaneous abortions, and induced abortions. But what do we mean now by the term abortion in law and public policy? What is being sought to be regulated? So let's take Merriam-Webster Medical Dictionary definition, which is pretty good. The termination of a pregnancy after, accompanied by, resulting in, or closely followed by the death of the embryo or fetus. There's two aspects to this definition. The first is the separation of the mother and the fetus. The second is the death of the fetus. Now, if we look at the separation of the mother and the fetus, that's going to happen in one of two ways. Either it's spontaneous, that is, it happened without any human intervention, or it's induced, which means the separation happened because of human intervention. There are two aspects to the induced abortion. One, before 20 weeks, any OB-GYN will separate the mother and the fetus to save the life of the mother. And we prefer the term as more accurate, pre-viable parturition. We know that baby will die. If we don't separate, we lose them both. If we do separate, we lose the baby, we save the mom. Every pro-life OB-GYN has been faced with this. But there's a second reason to cause a separation, and that is to produce a dead baby, elective induced abortion. Now, Dr. Harrison, how in the world can you say that the purpose of an abortion is to produce a dead baby? Let me give you an illustration. If an abortion is performed at 30 weeks and the baby lives, what is that called? No, it's called a failed abortion. The separation did not fail to happen. What failed to happen is the baby failed to die. And this point was made explicitly clear during the partial birth abortion hearings when the court asked the abortionists, you've got the baby delivered to the point where only the head's left inside the vagina, why don't you just deliver the baby? And the answer was, because the product we are paid to produce is a dead baby. Okay? It's very clear, and this is at any gestational age. So American Association of Pro-Life OB-GYNs has attempted to help clarify this discussion for practitioners. These documents, the practice guidelines are mostly focused toward physicians. They're not patient information stuff, but anybody can read them. And what we did was try to be clear that uniform definitions surrounding the end of pregnancy are important for women's health providers, policymakers, and advocates. In particular, the care of missed miscarriage, ectopic pregnancy, septic abortion, and pre-viable life-threatening maternal conditions are often cited as conditions that require abortion. But this guideline aims to describe a general approach to defining abortion, since not all medical or surgical decisions that surround the end of a pregnancy are abortion. Here, abortion is defined as intentional feticide, any drug, device, or procedure used to ensure the death of the human being in utero before, during, or in the process of separation of the mother and her embryo or fetus. Or unnecessary delivery, any pre-viable delivery without proportional danger of maternal death, or any post-viable delivery with the intentional death of the fetus or neonate. It's a very clear definition, and that's what we're talking about when we talk about elective induced abortion. Circumstances that are specifically not defined as abortion include the separation of the mother and her embryo or fetus to prevent the mother's death or immediate, permanent, irreversible bodily harm, which cannot be mitigated in any other way, including ectopic pregnancy and critical maternal illness. Similarly, definitions of euthanasia, what we see in the euthanasia movement is a parallel to the techniques that were used to foist legalized elective abortion on the country. It didn't come from the bottom up, it came from the top down. Similar things are being done in the euthanasia movement. So explicit definitions are incredibly helpful if you're going to enter this discussion. Active euthanasia, killing a patient by active means, for example, by injecting a patient with a lethal dose of drug. Physician-assisted suicide. The phrase physician-assisted suicide refers to active, voluntary, assisted euthanasia, where a physician assists the patient. The physician provides the patient with a means such as sufficient medication for the patient to administer themselves, to kill themselves. The distinction between, and I'm going to read this next part here because it illustrates so clearly the two different philosophical worldviews for medicine. The distinction between killing and letting die is controversial in healthcare because critics charge that there is no proper moral basis for the distinction. They say that killing the above patient brings about the same end as letting the patient die. So the end defines the morality. Okay, this is a utilitarian hedonistic view. Others object to this and claim that the nature of the act of killing is different than letting die in ways that make it morally wrong. This is the virtue ethic view, that the action of a physician actively killing a patient is something that is contrary to the very definition of being a physician. If you're wondering where this is University of Missouri School of Medicine. It's actually a very interesting article. Death intended versus anticipated. Some ethicists believe that if a suffering, terminally ill patient dies because of intentionally receiving pain medications, it makes a difference whether the death itself was intended or anticipated. If the death was intended, it is wrong, but if the death was anticipated, it might be acceptable. This reasoning relies on the moral principle, the principle of double effect. But what I'm using this to illustrate to you is that the difference between death intended is the act of the physician involved in ending the life of their patient, as opposed to all of us know that ultimately our patients are going to die, as we will, but we don't kill somebody simply because they're going to die. So, how does this argument look today? What does it look like? When you read discussions about abortion, euthanasia, or even transgender medicine, although I hate to use the term transgender medicine in the same breath, the discussion turns on three interrelated terms. These terms are defined differently depending on whether you're coming from a virtue ethic or a utilitarian hedonist philosophical viewpoint. Those three terms are conscience, duty, and health. And I'm going to illustrate from the beginning of life issues, but this can be translated to any of the issues that we're facing today. So let's look at the word conscience. It turns out that law, at least Western law, is based on a virtue ethic philosophy, not a utilitarian hedonist philosophy. So the American Heritage medical definition of conscience, Stedman's Medical Dictionary, if you know Stedman's. Conscience is the awareness of a moral or ethical aspect to one's conduct, together with the urge to prefer right over wrong. Now let's contrast this with ACOG, American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists. Healthcare providers occasionally may find that providing indicated, even standard care would present for them a personal moral problem, a conflict of conscience, particularly in the field of reproductive medicine. So for a utilitarian hedonist, if you can't do something, that's your personal problem. It has nothing to do with me or right or wrong, which doesn't exist. It has to do with, you got a problem, sweetheart. Well, let's look at the word duty. This was very interesting, especially as a physician and a non-legal person, to understand. So if we look at the Law Dictionary, which is a virtue ethic definition, duty is a technical term of the law. Duty signifies a thing due, that which is due from a person and that which one person owes to another. In law, this word is the correlative of right. So wherever there exists a right in any person, there also rests a corresponding duty upon some other person or upon all persons in general. This is really important to understand because utilitarian hedonist arguments are all rights-based. So if someone has a right to do something, or a right to something in healthcare, you as a physician have a duty to provide it. That's the utilitarian hedonist view. And again, this is from ACOG because they say it so well. Conscientious refusals that conflict with patient well-being, which we're going to unpack in a minute, should be accommodated only if the primary duty to the patient can be fulfilled. The implicit assumption of a patient's right to whatever is being requested. So let's look at health or well-being. What is health? What is well-being? Well, well-being is a good or satisfactory condition of existence, a state characterized by health, happiness, and prosperity. What is health? The condition of being sound in mind or body, freedom from physical disease or pain, or flourishing, well-being. So legally and in the discourse, well-being is health and health is well-being. Let's turn to another definition of health. 1948, World Health Organization. This is the preamble to the Constitution of WHO. Health is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. Well, the British Medical Journal has done a fairly good job of critiquing this definition of health. And what the author said is most criticisms of the WHO definition concerns the absoluteness of the word complete in relation to well-being. This requirement for complete health would leave most of us unhealthy most of the time. Well, let's go to a more modern definition of health, which gets more and more interesting. This is the medical dictionary, there's the free dictionary online. A relative state in which one is able to function physically, mentally, socially, and spiritually in order to express the full range of one's unique potentialities within the environment in which one is living. Did you know that's what you went to medical school for? In the words of René Dubois, health is primarily a measure of each person's ability to do and become what he wants to become. Well, what happens when what I want to do and become, which is an assumed right, requires someone else to perform an action, the requisite duty, which they consider to be wrong? The expansive utilitarian hedonic definition of health runs headlong into the large body of law, defending the virtue ethic right of the individual to act in accordance with their conscience. This is the right rooted in the foundation of American society. And this is where we are at right now. This is where we're at right now. Forbidding the killing of human beings in medicine consistent with the Hippocratic Oath became tolerating the killing of human beings in medicine, i.e. neutral position on elective abortion and euthanasia, essentially gutting the Hippocratic Oath. Now, I'm going to give you two oaths. I'm not picking on Cornell. I'm not going to pick on Loma Linda, but I want you to just listen to this in contrast to the Hippocratic Oath. This is Cornell's version of the oath. I do solemnly vow to that which I value and hold most dear, that I will honor the profession of medicine, be just and generous to its members, sustain them in their service to humanity. Just as I have learned from those who preceded me, so will I instruct those who follow me in the science and art of medicine. I will recognize the limits of my knowledge and pursue lifelong learning to better care for the sick and prevent illness. I will seek the counsel of others when they are more expert so as to fulfill my obligation to those who are entrusted to my care. I will not withdraw from my patients in their time of need. I will lead my life and practice my art with integrity and honor, using my power wisely. But whatever I see or hear in the lives of my patients that's not fitting to be spoken, I will keep in confidence. Into whatever house I shall enter, it shall be for the good of the sick. Well, that's good. That I will maintain the sacred trust, holding myself far aloof from wrong, from corrupting, from the tempting of others to vice. That above all else I will serve the highest interests of my patients through the practice of my science and my art. That I will be an advocate for patients in need and strive for justice in the care of the sick. I will now turn to my calling, promising to preserve its finest traditions with the reward of long experience in the joy of healing. I make this vow freely and upon my honor. I'm not saying that it's all bad, but what I am saying is that it's vague and passive. There is no objective standard of virtue here. There is no prohibition against abortion or euthanasia, and no prohibition against sex with patients. Loma Linda's oath, it has similar problems. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but basically it's also very vague and passive. There's no prohibition against abortion or euthanasia. Patient autonomy is paramount, tacitly permitting voluntary euthanasia and even potentially harmful treatments, which we see. There would be nothing in the Loma Linda Oath that would forbid somebody from participating in transgender surgeries. Puts a doctor's primary responsibility to society in general, not to patients, thus allowing for healthcare rationing and decisions based on the health of society. So we get back to this dichotomy. You know, if you want to put it in kind of really blunt terms, the virtue ethic philosophical worldview for medicine says that I have my primary fiduciary responsibility to the patient. The hedonist utilitarian view says it's kind of a public health view. You know, my primary responsibility is to ensure the health of society. And these two fundamentally diverge when it comes to very specific practices. Well, where are we now? Forbidding the killing of human beings in medicine, consistent with the Hippocratic Oath, became tolerating the killing of human beings in medicine, i.e. neutral position on elective abortion and euthanasia, which has now changed to demanding medical professional involvement in killing human beings, a direct violation of the Hippocratic Oath. I'm going to share with you, I had the opportunity to go incognito with 6 other pro-life women, physicians, medical people, to the first international pro-abortion medical conference called Women Deliver in London, sponsored by Gates, USAID. I mean, I'm going to step on some toes. Just Google the sponsors of it sometime. It's eye-opening. Anyway, I participated in several of the breakout sessions. One of those was, what are the obstacles to worldwide elective abortion? This is 2007, guys. Number 1 obstacle, healthcare workers' rights of conscience. Number 2 obstacle, the presence of the Roman Catholic Church and Protestant missionaries in healthcare. Number 3 obstacle, the use of ultrasound, which unfortunately turns the mind of the woman to the humanity of her fetus. And number 4, the people themselves don't want it. Pay attention to this. But we will give it to them anyway by means of the legal system of each country. I heard this. I was sitting in the room when this was said. 2 months later, ACOG comes out with their limits of conscientious refusal in reproductive medicine, which I quoted before. But I'm going to go on to show you that this is not a coincidence. This is an outworking of a deliberate war on physicians who have Hippocratic principles. Although a respect for conscience is important, conscientious refusals should be limited if they constitute an imposition of religious or moral beliefs on patients, negatively affect a patient's health, remember the definition, are based on scientific misinformation, or create or reinforce racial or socioeconomic inequities. Now, I thought this last line was particularly interesting because the abortion rate in the black population is 3 times the abortion rate in the white population. So here, I didn't know if they were asking for more white abortions or less black abortions. It's very interesting. Conscientious refusals that conflict with patient well-being should be accommodated only if the primary duty to the patient can be fulfilled. Physicians and other healthcare providers have the duty to refer to patients in a timely manner to other providers if they do not feel that they can, in conscience, provide the standard reproductive services that patients request. Providers with moral or religious objections should either practice in proximity to individuals who do not share their views or ensure that referral processes are in place. In an emergency in which referral is not possible or might negatively have an impact on the patient's physical or mental health, providers have an obligation to provide medically indicated and requested care. Now, this is in the context of not only Roe versus Wade being in place, but Doe versus Bolton. And if you're not familiar with Doe versus Bolton, it was a Supreme Court decision issued the same day as Roe versus Wade. And in it, the Supreme Court defined health as any physical, psychological, social, familial, or any other factor. It was Doe versus Bolton that actually legalized abortion through birth. So when you talk health here, in the context of abortion, you're talking the legal definition of Doe versus Bolton. Many of the seminal articles written about conscientious objection are not written by physicians, they're written by lawyers. This is Altacharo. She is a lawyer from the University of Wisconsin. She served on Clinton's Bioethics Advisory Commission. And she wrote this scathing article, published, of course, in the New England Journal of Medicine, The Celestial Fire of Conscience, Refusing to Provide Medical Care. And take this, I mean, this is pertinent to the COVID epidemic as well. Just listen to what they're saying. In granting physicians a monopoly on the provision of health care, they turn the profession into a kind of public utility, obligated to provide service to all who seek it. Here's another seminal article, Dishonorable Disobedience, Why Refusal to Treat is Not Conscientious Objection. Conscientious objection, this is also written by a pro-abortion activist and a lawyer. Conscientious objection should be dealt with like any other failure to perform one's professional duty through enforcement and disciplinary measures. Counteracting institutional conscientious objection may require governmental or international intervention. Now, I'm going to read you this because I couldn't make this up. This is just like too incredible. This is March 2020, Human Rights Council, World Health Organization, or the UN, excuse me. This is the report of the Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Religion or Belief. And this is the section on gender-based violence and discriminations by private actors with religious motivations. They're writing about the accommodations on the basis of religious belief. And this is what they say. One area of particular concern regarding accommodations to natural law for religious beliefs is the use of conscientious objection by healthcare providers and institutions unwilling to perform abortions or provide access to contraception on religious grounds. So this is the World Health Organization 2022. In spite of the human rights obligation to ensure conscientious objection does not hinder access to quality abortion care, and previous WHO recommendations aimed at ensuring that conscientious objection does not undermine or hinder access to abortion care, conscientious objection continues to operate as a barrier to access quality abortion care. It is critical that states, this is the World Health Organization, who is going to be running our pandemic response mandate globally. It is critical that states ensure compliance with regulations and design and organize health systems to ensure access and continuity of quality abortion care. And if you don't want to put abortion care in there, put whatever thing you conscientiously object to in there, because it's all the same pattern. If it proves impossible to regulate conscientious objection in a way that respects, protects, and fulfills abortion seekers' rights, conscientious objection in abortion provision may become indefensible. That's the World Health Organization position, 2022. This is an email to me from ABOG. This is ABOG in 2022 also issued their misinformation, disinformation policy. And they said the dissemination of misinformation and disinformation not only involves COVID-19, but is a threat to the access to and ability to provide legal and safe, evidence-based, comprehensive reproductive care, including contraception and abortion. They're mostly worried about abortion. ABOG considers the dissemination of misinformation and disinformation that may threaten the health, remember the definition of health, of the patients who place their trust in its diplomats to be a violation of medical professionalism, and you are in danger of getting your board certification revoked. As an illustration of this, a week after this document was put out, Dr. Ingrid Skopp, who you heard this morning, was testifying at a Texas hearing about the effects of abortion on women. And right after she got done, the pro-abortion physician said, Dr. Skopp, I hope you realize that your testimony puts you in danger of rescinding your board certification because of your misinformation. What did Dr. Skopp do? She cited the medical literature. She cited peer-reviewed studies, and that's misinformation. So, let me give you another side of it. The American Association of Pro-Life OB-GYNs, our first document was Committee Opinion 1, Hippocratic Objection to Killing Human Beings in Medical Practice. And we start with a quote by Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr., which I think is very apropos for today. On some positions, cowardice asks the question, is it safe? Expediency asks the question, is it politic? Vanity asks the question, is it popular? But conscience asks the question, is it right? And there comes a time when one must take a position which is neither safe, nor politic, nor popular, but he must take it because conscience tells him it is right. Fundamental to the unique, this is not Dr. Martin Luther King. Fundamental to the unique physician-patient relationship is the concept of a fiduciary relationship, the trust that a patient has in her physician to do the best for her. That trust stems from the patient's belief that the physician has taken a professional vow by all the physician holds sacred to first do her no harm. That vow, the Hippocratic Oath, is the basis of the doctor-patient relationship. Recent concerted attempts to use punitive legal coercion to force healthcare professionals to participate in or perform the killing of their patients has resulted in a need to clearly again articulate the fundamental tenets of the Hippocratic medicine, which explicitly separates medical care from the intentional killing of human beings. Now, if you don't know this man, you should. This is Dr. Leon Kass. He's a Jewish physician from University of Chicago. And there is no way that I can improve on what he wrote. This is an article, I have about 10 copies of it out at the exhibit table. If anybody's interested in the full article, it's well worth reading. And you have to kind of search for it on the internet to find it. I'm just going to do a couple quotes. A physician friend who worked many years in a hospice caring for dying patients explained it to me most convincingly. Only because I knew that I could not and would not kill my patients was I able to enter most fully and intimately into caring for them as they lay dying. The psychological burden of the license to kill, not to speak of the brutalization of the physician killers, could very well be an intolerably high price to pay for physician-assisted euthanasia, especially if it leads to greater remoteness, aloofness, and indifference as defenses against the guilt associated with harming those we care for. In his section, Defining the Limits of Medicine, I'm boiling it down to just the salient things. One view is that medicine is whatever doctors do, and doctors do whatever doctors can do. Technique and power alone define the art. Put this way, we see the need for limits. Technique and power are ethically neutral. They can be usable for both good and ill. The need for finding or setting limits to the use of power is especially important when the power is dangerous. It matters more that we know the proper limits on the use of medical power or military power than, say, the proper limits on the use of a paintbrush or a violin. The wise setting of boundaries is based on discerning the excesses to which the power, when unrestrained, is prone. Applied to the professions, this principle would establish strict outer limits, indeed, inviolable taboos against occupational hazards to which each profession is especially prone. Within these outer limits, inside, no fixed rules of conduct apply. Instead, prudence, the wise judgment of the man on the spot, finds and adopts the best course of action in light of the circumstances. But the outer limits themselves are fixed, firm, and non-negotiable. What are these limits for medicine? At least 3 are set forth in the venerable Hippocratic Oath. No breach of confidentiality, no sexual relationship with patients, and no dispensing of deadly drugs. These unqualified self-imposed restrictions are readily understood in terms of the temptations to which the physician is most vulnerable. Temptations in each case regarding an area of vulnerability and exposure that the practice of medicine requires of patients. Patients necessarily divulge and reveal private and intimate details of their personal lives. Patients necessarily expose their naked bodies to the physician's objectifying gaze and investigating hands. Patients necessarily entrust their very lives to the physician's skill, technique, and judgment. The exposure is, in all cases, one-sided. It's asymmetric. The doctor does not reveal his intimacies, display his nakedness, or offer up his embodied life to the patient. The patient is vulnerable and exposed, and the physician is neither, or rather, his own vulnerabilities are not exposed to the patient. Mindful of the meaning of such non-mutual exposure, the physician voluntarily sets limits on his own conduct, pledging not to take advantage of or to violate the patient's intimacy, sexuality, or life itself. The prohibition against killing patients rests also on a narrower ground, related not only to the meaning of the doctor-patient relationship, but also, once again, to the potentially deadly moral neutrality of medical technique. For this reason, it stands as the first promise of self-restraint sworn in the Hippocratic Oath as medicine's primary taboo. I will neither give a deadly drug to anybody if asked for it, nor will I make a suggestion to this effect. But in forswearing the giving of a poison when asked for it, the Hippocratic physician rejects the view that the patient's choice for death can make killing him right. For the physician, at least, human life in living bodies commands respect and reverence by its very nature. As its respectability does not depend upon human agreement, it's not a social construct, or patient's consent, revocation of one's consent to live does not deprive one's living body of respectability. The deepest ethical principle restraining the physician's power is not the autonomy or freedom of the patient. Neither is it his own compassion or good intention. Rather, it is the dignity and mysterious power of human life itself, and therefore also what the oath calls the purity and holiness of the life and art to which he has sworn devotion. A person can choose to be a physician, but he cannot choose what physicianship means. And I think that's something that is really important for us to take home. If you don't take anything else home, there is a definition of what physicianship means, as well articulated in the Hippocratic Oath. So I'm going to conclude with these sort of thoughts. There are two competing philosophical views of what forms the basis of ethical physician conduct, or any ethical conduct. These two views represent two different basic philosophical, not scientific, paradigms about life and its meaning. The current reigning paradigm in medicine is utilitarian hedonist. The Hippocratic Oath assumes a virtue ethic paradigm. They are mutually incompatible. Which will ultimately prevail as the basis of medical ethics for the future is an open question. Thank you.